age 9. Hey. 30. $15. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Right 5, 150. Stay left over small crest 250. Right 6 plus, small crest 180. Repeat 180.
Next.
Caution left 3 over crest, no cut. 120. Nice. Right 6, very extra long 70. Left 5, very long. Repeat left 5, very long. Into right 5 long, over small crest, off camber 100. Right 5 long, over small crest, off camber 100. Right 6 plus, no cut 250. Small crest into a left 4 plus, no cut long. Repeat left 4 plus, no cut long. 120. Left 5 minus over small crest 100. Right 5 minus, tightens 4 off camber. Repeat right 5 minus, tightens 4 off camber 100. Right 5 off camber, tightens 4 plus, no cut. Into crest, into left 6, into right 6 plus, over crest 120, and a turn right 3 minus, into bridge, go. Right 3 minus, into bridge, go. Long small crest, left 6, 70, left 6 over crest, over small crest, tightens over crest 200. Repeat, left 6 over crest, over small crest, tightens over crest 200. Go. Stay left over crest 120. Right 5 plus, left 5 minus opens. Repeat, left 5 minus opens. Long small crest, into right 6 over small crest, tightens 5 plus, down 70. Left 5 over jump 300. Right 6 over small crest, go. Long over small crest, 120, finish, 250. Go, go, go. Go, go, go. Good job.
Fuck.
You want to reverse?
No, I'm not reversing on stage. They're gonna fucking walk to me.
Hey. You guys need to move the finish further.
I talked to multiple people about it and nobody said we could. I want to. Everybody's been asking. I know.
It's not safe.
Drivers. I know.
Like
I
this.
3 more. And
I know.
We want to move the truck too, and he won't do it either.
Okay, well thanks
All right,
anyway. That's alright.
Take care.
Thanks.
Yep.